All right. Morning, everyone. So this is Matt. And Lisa and I were talking a little bit over the past few weeks about best practices surrounding the ID element and how cross-example or cross-entry references ought to work in a couple of different cases. So I want to spend some time talking about that today. In particular, I know like at Epic, as we've implemented this, we've run into a few questions that we'll get into. Um, Lisa has some topics as well. So yeah, let's do it. So you may or may not already be familiar by now with just like the general background surrounding, the way that cross-entry ID references work. The typical example is like an author where in the C-CDA implementation guide, we explicitly call out this word here, where the ID can just reference an author elsewhere. And then we say if the ID does that, then you don't need to worry about the rest of the content in the author entry. So that looks something like this, right? Suppose that a single visitor provider diagnoses a patient with anxiety and then writes a prescription for alprazolam. So we might have a problem entry over here on the left in the problem section with like a full author, all the info. And then somewhere else in the document later on, like in the meta entry, say we have that same author. And so we just contain the ID and then call it a day. So this is great because it eliminates redundancy, right? Like it keeps your documents smaller. There's no point in just like repeating all of this info twice. The major disadvantage to doing this all over the place is that it makes things both harder to parse, because if you're parsing a document, now you suddenly have to think, okay, well, what if actually we don't have all the info here? We have to jump out to some other part of the document. And validation, we found, is much harder also because, say you have an observation or something that shall contain a code. Instead, you just have an ID. And to be clear, every observation for the CDA schema shall contain a code. The question becomes, okay, well, is this valid or not? Like, how do we do that? So historically, we have only really supported these ID cross-referencing semantics, like in a small handful of templates across C-CDA. So authors are the big one. Entry reference is explicitly designed for that. And then indications, which we'll get into, are sort of the other interesting one, where we have some verbiage in the template saying, try doing this maybe. But because of those considerations, I think typically if you just try to take any other kind of observation that isn't one of those three, or somewhere we explicitly say this is a thing that you can do and try to do it, it's not going to work. Like the validator will throw an error, and I'm not aware of any parsers that just for all entries, whether or not they say that you can do this, just support doing it anyway. So I think sort of one interesting thing to hear from implementers over here to start off with is, if anybody is parsing C-CDA documents today, how do they handle this ID cross-referencing? And more specifically, I guess, are there cases beyond the three I just called out, indications, entry references, and authors, where if you received just an ID and none of the other template content, you would be able to jump over to the entry that actually contains all the info and parse it from there?
I would also say node activity calls this out for encounter.
Oh, good point. Thanks. So,
And
yeah,
I think we might do it for encounter somewhere else, but it might also just be entry reference.
Yeah, so there are a small handful. But again, I'm thinking, I don't know if there are any places where people do this beyond where the IG specifically calls it out, like either sending or receiving.
I think what I've seen is you usually have people populating, especially with provenance now, they usually populate everything for what I've seen so far. So they
Oh,
would,
so
Mhm.
you're saying that typically you wouldn't even see this at all, like every author, even if it's the same author, would just be like fully specified out in both entries?
Correct. Yes.
Okay. Huh.
Matt, one of the places that we do this in patient-generated documents, I mean, it ends up being that the author in a patient-generated document is the patient. And so right now, we'd like to be able to state that by populating the record target fully and having I don't know if best practice would be that the document author could reference the patient by ID, thus sort of reducing the bloat size of the header. And this is that special case where, in fact, the patient is the author. And then in every other place where the author is needed, like for provenance author, if that's the patient, we would be referencing by ID, but ultimately resolving the ID goes back to finding it in the record target.
So I do have some opinions on that. I think it's a good thing to come back to once like I bring up some of the other questions I have around some
Okay.
of this, because
Okay.
like, yeah, no, definitely worth talking about and important and kind of like part of where I'm headed anyway.
Matt, may I bring one more each use case?
Yeah, go for it.
So, for example, in the case of the author that you have right now, let's say that the author, it either can be referencing to the author in the header, but it may also be bringing additional data about the author. So, for example, let's say author in the header don't have a telecom, but the author in the section do have a telecom or address, or maybe a secondary name or something like that. So what to do in that particular case? Should we update the practitioner, which was generated from the author in the header, or keep it as contained or something like that? So this is yet
So
another use case.
So you're saying you have the same author person, but one instance of the person has more info than the other?
Yeah. For example,
And
it
can
also
I
might
ask a
be
clarifying question? In that example, are you still using the same ID in the header and in the body of the
exactly.
document?
Yeah,
Okay, thanks.
exactly. So it will be assigned author, like in this example, but let's say it has a telecom with email, and you don't have email on the left-hand side.
Yeah, also kind of one of the questions that I wanted to jump into. So like both the things that you and Lisa brought up are like kind of exactly where I wanted to go with this. So we can get there in a little bit, I think. Any other thoughts so far? All right. I'll keep on keeping on then. So this sort of covers the basic case, right? Like authors support is pretty widely adopted nowadays, I would say. Really seems like the most common use case for this sort of thing. And there are plenty of vendors like exchanging plenty of docs in the wild that are doing this. Like we have pretty robust parsing and validation support for this. One area where I mentioned the template calls out that you can do this, but it seems a little murkier, and I'm curious about how well supported it is some of the non-author templates. So indication in particular has a very, very similar blurb to what author has, right? Where you can just contain the ID and then the application software is responsible for going back to it and doing the whole thing. So going back to our example before, suppose that that patient now has a follow-up visit with a separate provider for the anxiety we diagnosed. So say we've got that meta indication. where the author is one provider. And now we go over to the encounter indication, right? So we have the indication template in both places. And we're saying, oh, the reason for the patient taking this med is because of their anxiety. And then the reason for the patient having the separate follow-up visit is because of their anxiety. So same value and everything, like got the SNOMED code for anxiety over here. But one question now, or one thing that could potentially happen is who is the most appropriate author for each indication. So there are two ways that this could go. One thing that you could argue is the author of the med said that the med was for anxiety, and the author of the encounter said that the encounter was for anxiety. So therefore, the med author should be the author on the med indication over here. The encounter author should be the author on the encounter indication, and they should be two different authors. And the other thing I want to call out about that sort of is that if neither indication has an explicit author, because to be clear, the indication template doesn't even really call out specifically, like you should have authors or anything. It's just an open template. And I know for provenance reasons in USCDI, Epic is pretty, like we have decided to add this so that it's clear for the USCDI data element who the provenance author is. But you could have a lot of indications where you just don't have an author at all. And therefore you would just, according to the context conduction rules, which who knows how cleanly followed those are in all cases by everyone, you would just inherit different authorship. Like the indication author would have the med author anyway. For the meta indication, the encounter indication would have the encounter author anyway. The other way you could argue this is, each indication should have the same author because it's the provider who originally documented the problem. So if that's the case, then this question becomes moot anyway, because now both indications are 100% identical, and obviously you can use the same ID for both. So what that sort of leads to, like I said, Lisa and Shamil, this is sort of exactly where I think your questions were headed. Also, when should two entries have the exact same ID? So one possibility is you could say they should only have the same ID if they're 100% identical, which means that no matter which entry a parser looks at, they're guaranteed not to miss any data. But the other thing you could say, like, this first possibility is like the strictest one. It's clean, makes parsing easy. But another thing you could argue is even if two entries aren't 100% identical, say one has a documented phone number and the other doesn't, or something like that, or one is an author element in a CDA document, and the other is a patient role document or element in the CDA document. If we say, well, they refer to the same underlying data, it's the same person in both cases, then even if some of the metadata is different, like these indications having two different authors, or authors having different info, or one's an author and one's a patient, or whatever, we could say, well, they are the same data, so they should have the same ID. So yeah, I think before I keep going, that's sort of,
I've got like 3 responses for you already.
yeah, right.
You just asked 3 really good questions, at least.
Yeah, let's tease those questions back out, Matt, so that we can handle them, because I wanted to, back up. Maybe do you want to go maybe out of your presentation mode
Yeah,
and
sure.
list the questions so that we can see them and then take them one at a time?
So in my mind, the 2 questions that I want to ask here like for now, are the first bit about this, like who exactly should the author for each indication be?
Oh, well, maybe just go on the slide and let us
Yeah.
talk
Yeah.
about them separately, okay?
Yeah. Yeah, so assuming everyone can still see my screen, like yeah, let's start with this one, with this example I mentioned. Where these indications are identical, except maybe possibly they should have different authors. I'm curious to hear how people are landing on that today. And Lisa, it looks like you just had your hand
I
raised.
was
although
trying to,
maybe-
I'm being funny. I was trying to
Okay.
beat Ben, but Ben, if you want to go first.
Well, so this one's interesting, and this goes into where I say entry reference and indication are not well designed. And it's funny that you use encounter indication, because the encounter activity has an encounter diagnosis option. And in that case, you've got a diagnosis act and a problem observation. So you can have an author for the act, the person who made the diagnosis, and then the problem observation is just the problem. But when you've got indication, it's all jump. I hate that I'm going this route, because I don't like that act wrapper, except I'm now coming up with a good reason that it exists.
Yes.
When it's indication,
Remember
it's all
that.
jumbled up into one.
Yep.
The other problem is, we say indication can be an ID that equals something else. So the first time I saw your slide here, I thought you were talking about an indication for something, and elsewhere there's a problem on the problem list, and that has an author. Then how does that work? And that's where I started thinking, why are we using the ID of the indication to be the tie to something else? So both that and entry reference, I think, are a little special case in that regard, that maybe the ID isn't a globally unique ID for the thing. But in other cases, like the authors, and especially you mentioned author and patient, now I'm doing it. The author and patient have the same ID, then yeah, they're the same thing. We've used that pattern before. And so you just sort of merge them in those cases. But the indication and entry reference, I think, are a little special.
Yeah, no, that definitely is part of it. Where it's unclear to me if and when we are comfortable like giving the same ID to two like completely different templates, like an indication and a problem. Like if you're a C-CDA parser and you see an indication with an ID, and then the thing that actually has all of the info for that indication is not an indication at all, it's a problem, then my immediate question is like, how are you going to parse that? But if anybody is actually doing anything like that, I'd be super curious to know.
So I'd like to take us back to 6th grade when we learned how to diagram sentences, because I think that one of the things that your picture doesn't allow people to really appreciate in their mind is that an entry is a clinical statement. It's a sentence, a concept in a whole. And so when we were looking at, you're in the green, it says encounter indication. You're actually in the context of a statement about an encounter. The beginning of this entry is not this observation. The statement is there was an encounter and the reason why was this. So the person who's making the sentence is stating why, or who's articulating why this encounter happened, the indication. You have to, that's from their voice. That sentence is written, from one perspective. And the person who's telling you why they gave a medication, again, you're down inside, you're like in a parenthetical statement that's separated by a comma in the whole sentence. And that whole sentence is being authored by someone who's telling you about the medication that was administered or ordered or whatever, and why. And so it doesn't make sense that the indication would have some other author on it. It's the same author who's telling you about the medication or the encounter. They're making a complex clinical statement that has like parts to it. And that's why that outer act stuff, Ben, I'm glad that you're, like appreciating it. But every sentence isn't simple. Some sentences are more complex and they have, multiple parts to them. And to understand the whole sentence, like a problem concern act, you have to understand the complexity of the act, which then can take multiple parenthetical statements about problem observation, but they're joined together in a single sentence. So I think the answer to this question is the author of the indication is the person who's explaining why the medication was given or why the encounter happened. It's not the same thing.
Yeah. So, I mean, you said at the very end there, the author is the person who gave the medication or explained why. And I think that is kind of the heart of the thing, right? Like, one thing you can say is, oh, the author is the person who gave the medication. The other thing you could say is the author is the person who like created the indication. The provider who originally diagnosed the patient with anxiety or whatever.
But that's
And
just like a
okay.
problem. So that
So-
isn't,
okay, maybe I do see what you're saying.
not
So
making the statement of why.
You're arguing specifically that we think that the meta-indication author should be one provider because in this context, this is the person explaining why in the overall meta entry the meta is being
Yes.
taken. Okay, and then we would say, oh, the encounter indication author is a different person because they're the one explaining why for the encounter.
Yes.
Okay, cool. I'm with you. And for what it's worth, I'm inclined to agree with that perspective. I mean, my overall feelings about this are pretty finicky. I'm like, sort of like I was asking before, like, oh, when do we think that you should even have two things with the same ID at all? And my overall feeling about this is like, I'm pretty inclined to lean towards this first possibility here, where like, the only time that two entries should have the same ID is if you can just like literally copy paste out the XML, plop it in the other place and have your parser be able to continue on its way. So I'm curious to see what people think about that also. But obviously, like if we say that that's true, then it becomes much more obvious here that, oh, the meta author is the meta indication author and the encounter author is the encounter indication author.
I agree. That one possibility that you talk about is really, I think, the main case that they make, right? That second case, I mean, you could, but you need, it's like using AI, right? Like if you just let it run wild, it's not guaranteed to do what you think it's gonna do. So doing that second possibility, you just have to have some backup, some assurance. And I think with the first one, even you need to just be sure that that mapping fulfills the other requirements. I don't know what you would do if you map by ID. Let's say you have a full author on one side and you have a partial author that links to the full author. You mentioned that the validator should cover that. So that's kind of reassuring. But as far as having an implementer do it, they just need to be really sure about their process. I feel like it's risky, and I don't know if that's more risky than if you put in the full author for each entry, but that's what I'm more comfortable with because that's what I've seen the most.
And the validator covers that, to be clear, because we have explicitly crafted the validator to be able to handle this like as a special case. And like if you just tried to do this with some other template where the template doesn't specifically say this is allowed, the validator would be like, wow, you're missing like a zillion things you need. What are you doing?
Mhm.
So yeah, I do think it's important to be careful with like precisely when you do this.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
when,
because
and
mhm.
if you have multiple encounters too, we're only showing 3 or 4 encounter indications in here, you know, getting more difficult.
You cut
What
out
would your
there.
guidance be, Matt, if the person who's saying why they gave the medication, that there was nothing on the person's problem list to to like what you're trying to do is like imagine indication as a reference and you're just pointing to the condition resource. But what if there's not an instantiated condition resource to point to?
Well, that's part of what I'm saying is, in my mind, the indication and the condition are completely different CDA elements, like you parse them differently, and therefore they should have different IDs anyway. So like I don't think ought to have any bearing on each other really at all, such that like whether or not there's a condition that matches this indication shouldn't really matter.
Yeah, I'm imagining a sentence that has a because in it, right? The clinical statement pattern is, I'm giving, fill in the name of the medication because fill in the reason why. And that's the sentence.
Yep. And so the because part of that here is the indication.
Yeah.
And like, you might have some different sentence elsewhere in your document that's like, yeah, the patient has this problem, but in that sentence you're calling out like, it doesn't matter, I don't think.
Yeah. Do you have to have an author on does indication ever get used on its own? Like
indications do not need authors now.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking, is it's actually
just
kind of
leave it
weird
out.
there.
Yeah.
Don't make it so complex because you're only using the indication phrase to stuff what comes after the because.
Yep. So the reason that Epic decided to add authors to indications is because, especially for meta indications, like they're a data element in USCDI, everything in USCDI needs provenance. And so we decided, okay, probably the best way to like deal with that is to very explicitly say, here's the provenance author for this USCDI piece of information. But then, like, as we did that, we like kind of fell down this rabbit hole, and I was like, oh no, let's like go to the IAT with this.
Okay. So I have an example that is similarly complicated, because it's in a complex, a two-act complex clinical statement, and it comes to the opposite conclusion. And so if you don't, just because we're trying to get best practices, I don't want us to walk away with the best practice that thinks that we just made a general answer that works in all cases. I think we have specifically come to agreement about this pattern, but I have a different pattern that I think we might weigh in differently on.
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay, so I'll share my screen. I didn't make a fancy slide. I apologize about that, but oh, Matt, you have to stop sharing so I can
right.
start sharing.
Yep. Give me a moment and I will do that. There we go.
Okay, thanks. So this was in our, as Matt and I were debating and talking about this in the background, getting ready for this, I focused in on an example that I have been thinking about, and I'm just going to kind of narrow us into this one paragraph here. So the situation is a problem concern act, and this is what Ben was talking about. We have these statement patterns that has an act on the outside, and then it has other stuff on the inside, and sometimes the stuff on the inside can repeat. Like as if you had a sentence like, I love to eat, and then you can fill in any number of things: ice cream, fruit, meat, apples. You know, you have an underlying part that can repeat after that, but the beginning part of the sentence is, I like to eat. And so in a problem concern act, there's an act where you're saying, I'm concerned about, and then after that, you can fill in however many problems it is. And we mostly just do one because this is a totally misunderstood template, and everybody's really struggled with understanding the outer act separate from just saying the patient has this problem. So, so I have been thinking a lot about the longitudinal aspect of care, and you're like, okay, what if a patient goes in, they don't know what's wrong, they have some symptoms, they go see the doctor, and the doctor tells them what's wrong, they get an encounter diagnosis. Well, an encounter diagnosis is another thing, you know, over in the encounter section there, and it's an act wrapped problem observation. So if that problem that the doctor tells me I have on that day is diabetes, it's not going away. It's going on my problem list, because it's going to have to be managed over time. So the scenario is like, what if there's a problem that gets diagnosed, right? You're in this problem. Well, you're really starting in the story at the day that my problem gets diagnosed, which is, it starts out as an encounter diagnosis, which has an act wrapper that says it's an encounter diagnosis. And I'm saying that has ID 3234. Then the inner problem that says, oh, what you were diagnosed with today is diabetes. So that problem observation part has its own ID. In our template, we force an ID onto this problem observation, 567 for the example. Now, the time comes that somebody's making a decision to put this issue on my problem list, and they have to instantiate a problem concern act to put it on the problem list. So what I'm wondering is if what this looks like when you're actually pointing at the data is that I now have a problem concern act. This is a new kind of thing so I put a new ID, not 987. But the thing the problem that is going on my problem list is the problem that was diagnosed in this encounter diagnosis. So is this a case where that inner problem observation ID should actually be the same as this one?
I lean towards yes.
Yeah, I mean, if I'm understanding you correctly, this is a case where, like, if you copy pasted the XML specifically of the inner problem observation, it's 100% identical across both, right?
Yep.
So, yeah, as
But
far as
I think that I think we all, like, I don't know, let's let other people. So Ben agrees, Matt agrees.
Well, I mean, if you look at it in fire terms, right? If you're going to represent this in fire, you would just the reference in the encounter to the diagnosis and the reference to the problem to the diagnosis would be the same reference, right? And this would be the same thing. It should just be the same ID.
Yep. So Jean agrees.
And
Anybody
that baseline,
else?
yeah, that baseline mentioned that Matt S mentioned, right? If they're going to be identical, and Benjamin mentioned this too in chat. I think that identical baseline is enough for me to agree with you too. As long as they're going to be identical, I don't see the issue.
All right. And Matt, you do such a Matt, well, how do they distinguish you at DHIT? So I know which Matt. Is there a special Matt with one T?
Matt with one T, that's what they call
Matt
it.
with
Yeah.
one T, you know, that's great. I'm going to make this problem a little bit complicated and see if you guys change your mind or not. So this is
Okay.
Dr. Smith, who saw the patient here. And now I go back to my primary care physician, who is Dr. Jones. And they put the problem on the problem list. Do you still agree that these are the same thing? And would Dr. Jones actually be putting an act where the author is Dr. Jones, which would include the problem observation that was by Dr. Smith.
So now you're saying the parent acts have different authors, but the observations themselves are still the same?
Yes, so this would be your encounter act. I'm just going to go like E act is going to be author Dr. Smith. And the encompassed problem observation is going to be author Dr. Smith, because he's the guy who figured out I had diabetes. You know, when that's the moment in time that problem observation was instantiated. It was an encounter with Dr. Smith. He figured it out. So he's the author on the encounter act, and he's the author on the problem observation. But later, when my primary says, oh, yeah, we got something we got to deal with on your problem list now, you've got diabetes, he's taking responsibility for the concern act. But the underlying problem observation is coming to him. It was already diagnosed by Dr. Smith. He's not re-diagnosing me. It's already known. So if you're following me and you're like still feeling like this makes sense, we have to update our ultimate thinking and the guidance that we've been telling people about how you handle problem concern act.
Yeah, I think one of the, as I'm listening to what you're talking about, I think the problem is, no pun intended, the authors of the things, right? Like again, and I hate to do this, I hate when people do it, but I'm doing it in fire. That problem, the problem resource would point to its authors, and so you could, me in I as a different person, and I could point to that problem, and there'd be no confusion that I'm not the author of that indication of the of that problem. But here, I think by doing the IDs, because we may not necessarily, because we've got the stupid context conduction where the original problem, you know, may not have an author because the author of the document was that problem or what have you, or you know, like that's I think a concern is that you have to include an author. And so it'd be interesting if the entry reference or the ID, if you could say, you know, somehow indicate I'm not the author of it. And maybe I'm missing the point, but that's what I've been, as I've been listening to you guys think, I've been thinking that's the problem.
I'm starting to get lost as a non-veteran because of the text versus the visual. I'm very comfortable with being able to see an XML.
Look at the XML. Yeah,
Yeah,
sorry,
yeah.
I didn't. I'm trying to think if we have a problem concern act that we could bring up really quickly.
But I do get the general gist of what you're saying, right? And Matt S kind of helped out with that. You have the same problem observation, but you have two different authors. Is that the gist?
Well, no, the problem observation is nested inside this act. So the XML is a nested structure, and the entry is this outer act and has nested inside of it an observation.
Okay.
And so in this case, in the story, the outer act is the guy who did the encounter, and he's also the one who states what the diagnosis, what the problem is. In this case, the person who's saying that the patient has a certain issue on their problem list is the primary care physician, a different doctor. But the problem that he's putting on the patient's problem list is the problem that Dr. Smith diagnosed.
And so we have an entry act author and then a problem observation author. Is that correct?
You have an encounter act author and a problem concern act author.
Okay.
And then inside these entries, oh, I wish I could bring something up really quick. Let me just think really, I'm thinking if I have an example that I could, just to get us visualizing the problem concern.
I think if you could also do the expat-like conversation we're having now, that could be a kind of filling for the visual, just to get a full idea. But it still seems like I get the gist. The idea is that you have, in the first example, it's two authors, but the same author, right? So the same author in two different places. The second example is you have two different authors in two different places.
Yep.
Okay.
Well, yeah, but one entry
Yes,
here
yes,
and one entry here. It just has
yes,
component parts.
yes, yes. That
Yep.
makes sense.
So what is Dr. Jones putting in? That's what I'm kind of confused about.
Dr. Jones is the guy, you know, after you're at the first doctor, the specialist, whatever, and he says, "Oh, I did all these tests and now I'm figuring out you've got diabetes." So today at this encounter, there's an encounter diagnosis. You know, never before did anybody know you have diabetes. As of today, you've got diabetes. And I want you to keep following up with your primary care physician. So your primary care physician sees you, let's say a week later. And before then, there was never the problem diabetes on your problem list because the primary care guy didn't know you had diabetes. But from that day that you went to your follow-up visit with your primary care guy, he's like, "Oh, you've got diabetes. We got to get this on your problem list, and it's going to need to be managed for the rest of your life."
So you're saying Dr. Jones found that you had diabetes, and then he went back to the primary care physician.
In this example, Dr. Smith is the one who finds out that you have he diagnoses the diabetes.
Right.
This is Dr.
So,
Smith.
Is that your primary? That's your primary care?
No,
doctor,
this is
right?
like, think of him
No,
as the specialist.
he's a specialist.
Oh,
yeah.
Okay, so you go to specialist
Okay,
first.
then you go to
Okay.
your primary care, and your
That's what I
primary
said.
care says, "Oh, we got to get this." Maybe there's even like a document that went from the specialist back, and he's looking at it and go, "Oh my gosh, you've got diabetes. We
Yeah.
got to get that on your problem list."
Yeah,
And
this
so the
this kind of
primary
reminds
care,
me of Project Claire, Lisa, where if you think about it, so the primary care physician, say it was Dr. Smith, said that you had diabetes with no complications, then you refer them to an eye care doctor. The eye care doctor takes a look and says, "Yeah, well, but they have macular edema," and they have to add a new problem. And then the report goes back to the primary. He has to update his problem. So I mean, it can get super complicated. I mean, I agree with you. I think you have to keep the original owner, regardless of who's documenting. But in the case of Project Claire, you've now got the diagnosis has to be changed because the original diagnosis said no complications. The eye doctor says no, they do have complications. I'm rewriting the problem, and now, you know, the report goes back to the primary care. He has to update, you know, accordingly. So it can get super complex, but I do agree. The original person that diagnosed has to be the author, regardless of who's making the indication. But
so
yeah.
Matt, here's your XML. So this is here's a problem concern there's this outer act. And then inside here, there's a problem observation. And we've previously always given guidance about putting the author of this whole problem concern entry, carrying the author down here on the problem observation. And we've never explicitly said that actually the author of the concern belongs up here on the concern act. And the author of the problem observation should be whoever is the author of this thing that, you know, this ID'd, I don't know which of the IDs is the right ID to use. That's something else to talk about, but of this identified actual problem.
I think you can have multiple IDs, but in this situation, I agree with you, right? Because usually what you'll see is you'll see the entry act author and this what did you say is the observation? The observation
The
author be the
observation
same.
author separate
Yeah.
from the entry act author.
Exactly, separate,
Lisa,
but usually the
yeah.
same person. And in this case, you're talking about a situation when it's two different people and you're trying to provide guidance for the observation author.
Yeah.
Would that validate if you have the author in the observation and then the author in the root level act?
Yes, it would.
So Lisa, this is, I want to jump. I hear this discussion, and I mean, I think what you're getting to though is like, the author concern is a separate object in the observation, and it has kind of its own lifespan. And I think we've had conversations over and over and saying like, we haven't seen that represented in systems today as them being split that way.
We
And when I
haven't,
hear,
Brett, you're right, we
Right,
haven't. That's
and
why
so-
I'm saying that,
so
that
this is
if,
where, yeah, this is where we gotta be careful. We're inventing things that like we don't have I mean, if you're saying this is a new clinical thing, you know, I mean, you guys know me, I'm very much trying to ground in like, what do systems do today? And for the scenario you gave, a provider said encounter diagnosis of diabetes, then my PCP adds that. I mean, for me, the PCP is making that decision that this is a problem to ongoing manage. It's a different thing. Now, the reason I say that is I've been in situations where the encounter diagnosis, you know, they pick something so it could be billed. It's not, to me, it's like this. I don't think of it as someone, I don't know. I don't think of it as the same level of judgment as like, I support ongoing management of it. And that's
Right.
when it's on the problem list. And so to
Exactly.
me, that's when, so to me, they're not the same author. The person who puts it on the primary problem list is a special person. And that the first time that's done, that is the author to me.
Yeah, I'm in agreement with that, Brett. I mean, it sort of makes sense. I mean, I get where you're going with it, Lisa, and I don't disagree, but I'm thinking of the lifetime of the encounter, and they're doing it for billing. You're right. That's absolutely. They want to build the problem, and they're taking the accountability from that point on, and so it should remain as the author of the original documenter.
And so
it
Brett,
should have a new ID.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, the good
Okay,
news
so-
is if we go with Brett's, you know, the kind of the position that Brett just brought up, which is different than where, you know, before I added these people in, we were all thinking, oh, this is the same, this problem observation and this problem observation were the same thing. We all felt that way. Then we added this wrinkle and the conversation went in a different direction. So if we
It's Rachel.
land
I have a
here,
question.
I'm willing to do a slightly different workflow here, Lisa. Like pretend that as part of the visit, Dr. Smith, who's not your primary care doc, adds a problem to the problem list. And as he's wrapping up the encounter, he has to select what the encounter was related to and selects that particular problem. Then I can see them all matching. It's just the kind of reverse that makes my head spin a bit.
Okay, so in closing, it's Rachel. In closing the referral loop, you have to reconcile patient's data in. Problems are one of the things you're reconciling. When you pull that in, you pull it in as the problem, and the doctor accepts it and reconciles it if he chooses to. You have to keep the source of that, I mean, of where that came from and the provenance of that. So I'm a little confused how it's a different data element.
So
It's a different problem
Rick,
because he's accepting it through reconciliation.
So let's
If he
be, I want to
did.
make sure we're super careful.
Like,
I'm not familiar with folks reconciling encounter diagnoses that, you know, I think about like a problem list being exchanged and you're reconciling that problem list.
yes.
So if I'm reconciling the problem list, Rochelle, I think this is the $1 million question is if during reconciliation, and I look to the EHRs who've built the Siri capability,
Mm-hmm.
you know, what do you track when you do that? That to me is the big question.
By
Because
certification requirements, you got to track the provenance and it has to stay with the data.
so that's really hard for me to get my head around, Rochelle, because if you
I
as a
hear you.
provider,
But
no, because if as a provider, when Dr. Jones makes the judgment call to add diabetes, what if he further specifies it's type 2 diabetes? You know, that it was
well, that would
generic.
be different, right? But if he chooses to pull the data element in through reconciliation and have it in his chart, the EHR system's requirement is for them to carry the provenance with the data, and it's certified that way.
Yeah, and what they were doing before was even worse, Brett. What they were doing is incorporating it into the EHR, and then when they output the C-CDA
Transition or
transmitted
CCD.
communication,
Yeah.
they were taking ownership and putting their own information in. Yeah, exactly.
Right. right? Which is not okay either.
No, that's not okay either. But I mean but but you're both right, but it could change, right? Like you're right,
Mhm.
you know, Brett, that it could change where the diagnosis is now type 2, like it's actually qualified. That's what I was saying
Or the
before.
date is updated, or I guess
The date could be
maybe these are
updated because they're reconfirming, you know, yeah, they've got diabetes, there's no other complications, everything's fine. You putting in
Well, that's a different
concern.
data element though, right?
That's a different
If
data
the date
element, yeah.
changes, a different data element. So
Yeah.
I'm just saying, if we're
Matt,
going to make
yeah.
some type of decisions here, we need to carry it through to ONC.
Yeah, well, I think
For the
I
test
think we really
script.
need to document both. I think we need to document all the use cases because I'm not
Mhm.
100% clear on every single one of the use cases we're presenting. And maybe there's, you know, where Matt said where they're 100% the same, it's obvious, right? But when there's some ambiguity or some conflict when you're seeing multiple doctors, it's possible that, you know, we may have to work through those.
I would imagine they just wouldn't reconcile it. They would take it as
Well,
advice, but then make their own
So
decisions.
we're at time, and I want to go
Oh.
back to Matt's discussion. Do we have something we need to document? Do we have a best practice to document, or what's the conclusion from this conversation we've had?
I think what they just said is that, like Dennis was saying, that we have to document the use cases and be clear, because there's situations where it doesn't make sense, that it's, you know, to think of this as the same data element. And then, as Rochelle said, there's use cases where it does. And it's not
Yeah.
just a straightforward single rule.
Yeah, agreed.
yeah, it's going to be
Listen-
situational, unfortunately.
And we did, I know we need to move on, but I do, you know, we did spend a lot of effort in the basic provenance to try to work through. I think going back to the pictures on the basic provenance page of saying you're reconciling allergies, you know, you make this change, you know, who's the author here? And I'm not saying it's perfect, but I think kind of working through those types of workflows is how you can bring people along to make decisions.
Again, do we have enough to document this?
I think we have an action, right? So we have this action about driving up use cases. The question I have is who gets their name attached to it?
I think Matt S., are you willing to work on this a little bit more? I'll send you the notes that I just took. I'm going to add Brett's note that says, suggest starting with use cases as documented in the provenance IG, so that we make sure that this lines up with, you know, where we've thought about it so far.
Normally I would say yes. Right now it's going to be a little bit of a weird follow-up for me to take.
Oh, can I work with Ryan on it?
Ryan, you there?
Yeah, I can work with you on that, Lisa.
Awesome. Way to jump into the fire.
All right, good.
Love
All right,
that.
thanks everybody. I see DD is here. DD. Are you on holidays and you've just joined us from
Yes,
some,
I am in Costa Rica right
I was
now.
going to say from some fantastic place, and you've taken time out.
I am. That's why I'm very sorry I'm missing most of the implementation-a-thon, but I just couldn't work and take vacation at the same time. So I am Costa Rica.
I tried that when I was in Mexico, and I agree with you. It's too hard.
It just doesn't work. So
it doesn't work.
while I have done a few calls, I'm doing them sparingly, and this is definitely
Now, I do have to say we need to see a picture at your hotel window or whatever, or as far as we know, you're in Michigan.
Well, I'll post one in the chat right after I give my presentation. Let's do that.
Okay,
That sounds like a plan.
All right. Anyway,
I would do it with the camera, but it's not going to be easy where I'm sitting right now. So it'll be be more difficult. But I will send a photo or two in the chat.
So we can be jealous. Yeah. What is spring like in Costa Rica? That's how we'll tie it
Oh,
in.
it's actually summer. It's very hot. This is the dry season. The rainy season starts in May. So the good thing is there's no mosquitoes, but the bad thing is that it's, you know, more or less 29, 30 degrees Celsius at the minimum in the daytime. So it's a little warmish, but
Okay, yeah, you may have missed the pictures of Jagger and my spring, which is inch of snow. So, you know,
Yeah, exactly. And it's funny, we're staying in a villa, and one of there's two couples that are from Toronto staying here this week as well. So interesting little thing. But yes, they were talking about how they left snow, and they were not happy with that. But and sorry I didn't send spring pictures, but in Tennessee, where I normally live, there's all the dogwoods and all of the spring flowers are blooming. April showers bring May flowers. So anyway,
So
Right.
nothing is ever easy, right? It always it depends. Spring in Costa Rica is like summer. Spring in Canada is like winter.
like winter. Exactly. But now they do have their spring. It just comes a little later because it's further north, you know.
Right. All right.
Oh,
Anyway, we'll let you back to this. So you're going to talk to us about the data usability taking root
yes.
track.
Do you want me to present, or do you guys have
Yes.
slides? How would you? Okay, no problem.
It's
Let me
easier
share
if you
my-
present if you can.
Yes, I can do that. I have the slides up. And let me do this, share. And let me bring up these and go into slideshow mode. All right. Well, thanks for the opportunity to present this. I'll keep it brief. For those who don't know, I'm Dee Dee Davis with the Sequoia project. My title is Vice President of Informatics, Conformance, and Interoperability. And I have the wonderful pleasure of leading, facilitating, and convening our community of practice for data usability. We've been doing this since 2020. We've released one implementation guide already in December of 2022, version 1. We are now currently working on version 2. And in July of last year, we partnered with AHIMA, the American Health Information and Management Association, to launch what we call Data Usability Taking Root movement. And what that really is making sure that that implementation guide that we authored and published with our community. We have a work group of close to 400 organizations and actually over 500 participants or members from those organizations. And we wanted to make sure that implementation guide just didn't sit on a shelf and collect dust, that it was implemented and actually adopted by the real world, institutions and customers of vendor products, technology platforms, whether it's a health information exchange, an electronic health record, et cetera. So that's a little bit about the data usability piece and putting that into practice. For those who don't know the Sequoia project, really our goal is to make the right information accessible at the right place at the right time. But we want to make sure that we do that in an interconnected way that's leveraging standards wherever possible, so that people can be accountable and know what they're not doing correctly. Again, our mission is to provide a secure, interoperable nationwide health information exchange. This is kind of the timeline. Again, we launched the data usability work group in 2020 with our board recommendation. They figured that while we're moving all of this wonderful data, by the way, care quality, which is kind of the precursor to TEFCA, it's the public-private version of the government TEFCA framework, is exchanging over 750 million clinical documents every single month. So while the data is moving, we want to make sure the data is good, because you can't leverage the health IT technology, clinical decision support, AI, et cetera, without having good quality data. And we launched the data usability taking root again in July of 23. Again, we thank HEMA with helping us to do this. I've already given you a little precursor. The work group, the data usability work group, meets once a month. The first Thursday of every month. All the meetings are recorded and made available. We've published version 1. We're working on version 2, and this is not a one and done. This will be iterative. Every couple of years, we'll be putting out a new guide. Our goal and charter requires that we put out an implementation guide that has guidance that can be implemented in 18 months or less, 12 to 18 months by vendors and their customers. The movement itself is really a community of practice. We have monthly roundtables. Those meet the last Wednesday of every month. And there is, we had a summit last September, and we prioritized what do we need to support the community of practice. We came up that there needs to be some technical assistance, guidance provided. We will continue having in-person convenings. We just launched and announced at the HIMSS conference the Friday before that our testing platform is available. And I apologize, I wanted to be able to make our testing platform available for you guys this afternoon, but I am going to be on a ferry this afternoon, and it just wasn't going to be practical, and I have one person out, so I couldn't even delegate to anybody. But the community of practice have folks that are actually having to sign pledges. They need to get their implementation folks, their upper management folks all lined up to either be an implementer, a supporter, or sponsor like AHIMA is helping us do with the guide. The version 1 that was published had 6 topic categories, everything from data provenance, you guys were just talking about. I joined a few minutes while you were on your last conversation. Data integrity, format, and trust, effective use of codes, data tagging, searchability, reducing impact of duplicates, and effective use of narratives, making sure narratives are where they need to be within the clinical documents exchange. But the overreaching use cases are provider to provider, provider to public health, or public health back to a provider, and healthcare entity to consumer. And then we further scope those to have those pain points better defined. So really the community practice is helping us identify where to start, putting this guidance into practice as a team, a community with customers and everyone involved. We do have a scorecard that we published in January that we will start reporting metrics on how many folks have actually implemented and adopted this guidance starting in July. July of 2024 will be the first metrics. I expect those numbers to be very low, but I'm hoping over time they'll continue to increase incrementally, and really that implementers start thinking about usability in all projects. And then we are hoping that this will inform future governances. I mentioned care quality, TEFCA. We did comment on the USCDI in version 5 has 2 of the data elements that we've highly recommended that they add and so forth. So we do want to provide that feedback loop. But the main thing is that all implementers, supporters, etc., can participate at their own pace. They pick and choose whether they implement one topic category, maybe data provenance. That's all I'm going to focus on for the next 12 months. They can pick and choose what they're going to do, and hopefully they'll make that more transparent to folks. Again, we made sure everyone is pledging for this, so pledges are still open if you're interested in joining this movement and helping do that. Implementers, supporters, there are pledges to sign, and we're very grateful for those who have already done so. These are a little bit better definitions of those different membership options or levels of engagement. And these are the folks as of March last month who have signed on and are following this community of practice for the Taking Root movement. So that gives you a little bit. And you do have all these slides already available, I believe, on the agenda. So again, we want to provide the technical assistance, testing platform services so that folks will understand what they are or not doing correctly. And the guide does start off with USCDI version 1. So that is the base, and then it adds additional conformance requirements on top of that. These are the link of all the meetings. We just had the March 27th meeting. Our next one will be next week on April 24th. And the roadmap is really to continue having folks join us, expanding that community of practice, and continue providing the scorecard metrics for folks to understand where they are and continue to move, grow the movement. And hopefully by 2025, we'll have version 2 available, and we can add that on as options for folks to adopt as well. So the priorities for technical assistance kind of fell into 6 buckets. And the first quarter of this year, we've been focused on these 3. We again released the implementation scorecard in January. The testing tools and conformance services platform was launched in March. And we are working right now on a readiness checklist. That's in fact one of the main agenda items on next week's agenda to discuss. And we'll eventually add more training resources, hopefully working with you guys on the implementation-a-thons to also provide some use cases to review. So again, it's time for data usability to take root. We invite you to follow along if you're not already. If you have any questions, please send us an email at takingroot@sequoiaproject.org. And sorry, I ran maybe 2 or 3 minutes over, but that's it for me.
Perfect,
It
thank you.
happens.
No, you're
Thanks,
actually
Mike.
on time.
Oh, I am. It's only 14 minutes after, so.
Yep. Does anyone have any questions for Dee Dee around this? All right. Well, thank you for taking time out of your Michigan vacation to join us. I mean, sorry, your Costa Rica vacation to join us.
Hey, I will post a picture. We have howler monkeys and scarlet red macaws in a tree right beside our villa every day.
Have you been there before, Dee Dee?
No, this is our first trip. So
I've been there twice. Totally love it.
It's pretty amazing. The people are also friendly, and it's definitely a beautiful place. And I have my aunt who is here with me. She was able to join us as well. So we're having our little adventures. So wonderful. But yes, and I look forward to sharing more pictures as soon as I post these couple next time we see each other in person, hopefully in May.
All right.
Thanks again
Safe
for the
travels, Dee Dee.
opportunity.
Thanks.
All right. Thank you, guys.
Right. So I'm just going to bring up the agenda. We did find place for more USCDI. So we're going to do it right after the afternoon break. We're going to steal half an hour from the report out. So we had an hour and 45. That was probably a bit too much. So we're gonna have a session here for Brett and Gay to continue the USCDI discussion. So after at 4 o'clock Eastern for half an hour, the more USCDI V5. But right now we've got a 15-minute introduction to the breakout tracks. So, and then we'll go into a break and then we'll go to the breakout tracks. So we've got those ready to go. So as a reminder, we have 2 breakout tracks, a validation working session. So Benjamin and others will be there to help people get set up, get the validator set up. And kind of, if you remember it, for those of you who are on the break, when we're helping Lisa, we can help people get the validator set up and help people with their documents and test a whole bunch of different things. And there's also going to be an advanced directives track where they're looking at advanced directives. And on that note, we have, oh, hold on, we have a video to show and I need to share sound. Okay. This is probably going to come up with an ad.
There's a skip you can do on the ad.
Yeah, I gotta wait. All right. So this is Dr. Seuss does advanced directives.
Whom it may, dear family and friends, and whom it may concern, I'm writing this poem to help you discern the actions to take and the things to refuse when some terrible day you are faced with the news that some sudden illness or stroke of bad luck has left me unconscious and helpless and stuck face up in an ER, laid out on a stretcher with chaos around, and you're under pressure to make some very quick, high-stakes decisions. I want you to feel you at least have a vision of what you can do so you'll know in your soul that you've done what you could with what's in your control.
But what?
There are so many things that could happen to me, from some normal disease to a strange tragedy. I could be shot, stabbed, or bombed by a crazed mass attacker. Or I could do something as simple as choke on a cracker.
I've done that.
If I were much older or already quite sick, I'd review what I do when I don't want right quick. But while in what I think is a good state of health, barring malignancies lurking in stealth, it's a bit more complex than would otherwise be, were I now gravely ill and you were my trustee. If I suffered already some known bad condition like terminal cancer, for which a physician had given a very poor, sad, short prognosis, like bile duct tumor or gliomatosis or PPMS or an end-stage cirrhosis, I'd choose my own plan for my own diagnosis. If my heart were about to give out and I knew it, I'd save you this trouble and write my way through it. I'd sit down with my doc and she'd sit down with me and we'd write out the orders for all docs to see. It would be what is known in most states as a post form. In our Commonwealth, we call it a most form. We'd talk about tubes for food and hydration, for breathing and peeing and resuscitation. She'd find out when I'd want to be hospitalized, and without much ado, it would be finalized. After all of my preferences I have confided, and my doc has checked off all the things we decided to make clear what I do when I don't want provided, we'd print out both pages, one sheet, double-sided. We'd sign with a pen in blue or black ink, and the paper would be Astro Bright's Pulsar Pink.
Pajam!
But that's not how it is, nor how it may be when someday you stand looking down sadly at me. When something has happened we'd all prefer not, when I'm mauled by a bear or a nasty blood clot that wedges its way into my heart and my brain and my pulse and my breathing I cannot maintain without all the people, machines, and the meds in this room with us now with the Clinitron
beds. Oh.
At this point, you're proxy, and I am unable to speak or write because I am unstable. What I advise now is you try to stay steady. They'll understand here that nobody's ready to see what you'll see and to hear what they'll say. You'll need to stay strong to get through this day.
Word.
In these first hours before they know much, there's no need to talk about hospice and such. I want pretty much everything under the sun to keep me alive till assessments are done. But that's where it gets hard. Those assessments are key to know well exactly what's happening to me. You remember, dear Julie, from your nursing classes, I'm sorry, I got to stop. My wife's name is Julie, by the way, and I forgot to mention that, and she's a nurse.
She's a nurse too.
And she's been working in home care for about 20 years or so as well, so she's been out of the acute space for that period.
How dare you personalize this?
She's my healthcare provider.
Beautiful.
So I'm sorry, I got to go back. Yeah. You remember, dear Julie, from your nursing classes, and know things are bad when they mention blood gases. When they work fast but talk to you slow as molasses to tell you my PCO2 count surpasses the level at which any life can sustain, and they've just placed a catheter in a large vein, and they tell you inserting a tube down my throat and pumping in air is the best antidote to whatever initial test tell them assails me. Let them do it, but know that it won't cure what ails me. Keep in mind all the time that there's really no doubt that whatever's put in, we can make them pull out.
Oh, whatever's put in, we can make them pull out. If it's day 2 or day 3.
If it's day 2 or day 3 and there's been no real changes, if we've not gotten past keeping vitals and ranges that keep me alive and my organs perfused, and my mental state's worse than just simply confused, and I'm still not able to talk, think, or write, it's time to get serious about how I want to fight. Now's when you'll need to deal with the odds and the chances and get all the intel on my circumstances. Make sure all the docs are real honest with you and they've given a total and thorough review to help make it clear what you think I would do. If there's a good chance I'll emerge from this coma with nothing so bad as a limp or a stoma, then tell them to go ahead with their bad selves and flitter on me like magical elves and poke me and prod me and turn me about and shove in more tubes from my tail to my snout.
Hallelujah.
But it must be a good chance. Don't take a long shot. To find out for sure, get a palliative consult.
What?
You want a clinician who's skilled in the art, who's taken the time to review my whole chart. You want him or her to be truthful with you, to share data and odds, and to talk the thing through. So review all the facts. Don't get too sentimental. Save that for the funeral. I won't be judgmental. If the life that I lived is now fully behind me, that's what I want in the end to define me. I don't want the memory of me recalled as an oblivious lump with devices installed, and I damn sure don't want all the money I've saved to be spent on my trip from this bed to that grave. I'd rather you have it, the kids and their spouses. If Bernie had one, it could help them buy houses. Because he did not, and they're going to need knowledge, you can set it aside to help them with college. But I guess I've digressed. That stuff's all in my will. Let's get back on the track and get you up this hill. If the odds don't look good, please don't grasp at faint straws. Tell my kids, friends, and mother, and my in-laws to gather, and just for a moment, take pause. Tell me you love me, give me a kiss. Have them turn off the things that buzz, roll, and hiss. Have the nurse give me meds to make sure I feel good, and pull the tubes out knowing it's understood that you were first rate. In a tough situation, you have only my love and my firm affirmation and my trust you've performed, as in past situations, in a way that's exceeded my best expectations.
Okay, wow.
That
was
was a lot.
great. We also
That's
have
a guy with some time on his hands, huh? Wasn't that amazing?
Yeah, exactly, yes. We also have a video, another video. I'm not going to play it. It's too long. It's from it's on the agenda page, so you can go there. I'll show you where it is. It's this first one here, and that one is also that's a serious one. A female doctor is doesn't matter why. I don't know why I said female. Sorry, a doctor is saying why advanced prescriptions are important. It's a longer one. We're not going to play it here. Lisa, I think you had something you wanted to display first around your breakout track.
There's one slide. I think it's in your deck too, Susan.
Sure, I can bring it up.
Yeah. And that shows the doctor, that one's a point of view of what it's like from the doctors. We're worried in the quadruple aim about physicians' experience. It's really hard on doctors when they have to do things to people at the end of their lives that they know are not going to lead to a better outcome, but there's no directives or orders that allow them to not do it. And so that's a very interesting perspective to hear from Elizabeth Claiborne, who's an ER doc, but it's much longer, so we didn't want to play it today. And right. I just wanted to summarize, this is a new section in town. It's not really new. It's been around since the beginning of consolidated CDA, but it's only come into its own right more recently. Mostly it was offered as a May section in some documents, But as USCDI is progressing and driving the focus on advanced directives through data elements like intervention preferences, treatment intervention preferences, and care experience preferences. And as you'll see in the next level of USCDI after V5, a whole data class around advanced directives. So this is coming. It's very important in value-based care, patient-centered care, a lot of things that we've known about before. It's even something that's starting to be driven to understand what is quality care. There are HEDIS measures, MIPS measures, focused on things that are measured that are affected by whether or not people have advanced care plans and whether or not care plans are in place to help with things like not readmitting patients that don't, they don't want to go back to the hospital. That's hospital readmissions is a big thing that's measured for quality. So whether you think of the stick, the requirement around USCDI V5, or you're driven just out of the mission of better care for patients, this is coming, and it's going to have to be more included in C-CDA and US Core, maybe raised from mays and shoulds to higher levels of requirements coming in future cycles. So this is our chance to with the updated advanced directive section and advanced directive organizer and observation added in release 3, this track is going to be helping implementers start to wrap their heads around what is this kind of information, how do you summarize it in consolidated CDA documents.
What did that look like for you, Lisa, as far as actually people using it? Like in my brain, I'm thinking, well, it sounds like Lisa wants it to be something as common as something like a PHQ-9 questionnaire. Is that oversimplifying it?
No, that'd be awesome, Matt. If everybody knew who their healthcare agent was going to be and these discussions happened. As a matter of fact, we just passed April 16th. If I said April 15th, y'all know what day April 15th is, right? That's tax day.
Yeah.
Well, April 16th is called National Healthcare Decisions Day, NHDD. And it got started because of the old saying, nothing is certain but death and taxes. And so the idea is that if everybody would at least stop and think about this issue in their own life once a year and make sure that you have your directives written down and updated, staying current, that we'd all be better off.
Yeah.
All right. So
Linda just
thinking
asked
your
the
track,
question,
you're
what
going to
if
be
they're in
talking
your
about.
will? Sorry, Linda just
yeah.
asked the question, what if they're in your will? So there are options for uploading, like for example, I work for my directives. That's probably a disclaimer that I should say, a company that's focused on making systems available for working with this kind of information. And we have an upload option. And the real thing is, if they're buried in your will, that's not accessible when you really need it. If you're going to have to go call your lawyer or figure out how to get into your safety deposit box, it's just not the best place. And so being able to scan those and upload them into a modern registry designed to make your directives more findable and accessible, that's a way to go. And you will see probably in the report out, if you don't come to the track, that where we are today is largely around managing PDFs, like to get off from paper. But the first baby step forward is having access to these documents, and they mostly come in as PDFs. But in the future, as more technology is brought to bear on this, they will become sort of unstructured CDAs and then eventually structured CDAs. That's the way we'd like to go. And in the future, what Maria Moen was here talking about yesterday is that all of this work is also being done in FHIR, so that simultaneously we're planning for the future when FHIR documents become more exchanged. Today it's CDA, but both formats will be supported.
I used to encounter them as a scanner, and it was like 20 pages deep, as like the paper version, with enough signatures for the relevant parties and stuff like that. So I'm very familiar with it. It's good to hear about it.
Yeah, I mean, in Alberta, our forms are green, not pink, but we've had with some elderly parents, we've had similar things, and I think it is important. And I'm really interested. That's why I'm don't know which track I'm going to go to in seeing how this goes forward, both in fire and in CDA. Because as a strange example, my mother-in-law, she has her green form. But it's supposed to be on your fridge so that if something happens to you and the paramedics come into your house, that's the first place they look. Okay, here we go. We can see what it is. She doesn't want it on her fridge. She says it's too morbid to have that on her fridge. Well, but having it in the spare bedroom in a filing cabinet is of no use. No, when the paramedics come, I'll just tell them where it is. No, the whole point is that you won't be able to tell them where it is. And so it'd be great if there was, electronic versions of these that you wouldn't need to look on the fridge. You'd be able to register them and be able to get them back pretty easily. So, all right. So we have a break right now, 15-minute break, and then when we come back, Dave Hamill will we've got the breakout tracks ready. We'll get them started, and people can choose which one, and you can go back and forth. You can flip back and forth to do that. Please remember.
Thanks. We're going to continue with the way too early design of USCDI draft V5. I believe where we left off is we had gotten we've dug into observations enough that we know there's work to be done, but we thought we would just start at orders. And just make sure you see I'm sharing here. So on orders, the definition is pretty broad. So it's provider authored directive for the delivery of patient care services. Examples include but are not limited to diagnostic imaging, laboratory tests, interventions, referrals, and consultations, and do not resuscitate. And so kind of our initial response to this was, any template that has the MOODS request or intent are in that order category. And so do we just list all those that have the capability, or do folks think we need to scope this down a little bit more? Al, or maybe Al, you want to talk a bit more about how you guys decided to add this class?
Sorry, am I okay? So the gist behind this was an interest in being able to express and exchange a provider's intent, and a provider's intent to treat, by way of an order or by way of a procedure, but by an order it's a way to capture an intention to treat, and that's used in certain measurements. It's used for quality measurements, where you have you can order smoking cessation counseling, and that counts as an intervention, even if the patient never followed up with the smoking cessation counselor. And so it's used not just to measure providers' intent for quality measurement, but it's a concept that it can be used for care down the road, like after a referral. Like I ordered something, it just hasn't been completed yet. I ordered a referral, or I would like to, I'm transferring a patient with orders attached to, with admission orders. Those kinds of things can be exchanged and express the provider's intent for follow-on for care down the road. And it's just a concept that doesn't really exist currently in USCDI, is the provider intent piece.
I'm
Wow,
trying to think.
was that clear?
Well,
Yeah, I was gonna say that's less, maybe even more fuzzy than we thought. Yeah.
We thought it was in there because of the focus on advanced healthcare directives, and we thought it was in there because of portable medical orders.
Yeah, the use of the words, well, the use of the words directive is maybe problematic. We have received some comments about the use of the word directive. It's not, at least it's not meant to be only portable medical orders or advanced, you know, certainly those would be considered a type of orders, certainly a unique category of orders, not just for, you know, I mean,
Right, it's a directive, not an necessarily an advanced directive.
yeah, and it just meant to, it was that the word choice was just to, you know, in writing definitions, you shouldn't use the word to define itself. And so we use directive instead of order.
So Al, are you saying that it, no, oh, wait a minute, now you're just, so when you were talking a lot about intent as opposed to order, but now you just use the word order. And so I just want to clarify that things that are orders are also included.
No, yeah, it is. No, I was using intent to describe why we added orders.
Yeah, it's just because I mean, in CDA, I don't know that we do this in fire, but we differentiate between something that's actually ordered and something where the clinician would like you to do something, but didn't actually order it. Like, you know, hey, why don't you take a Tylenol when you have foot pain? But not an actual order, or, you know, I'd like you to see so-and-so, but I'm not actually putting a referral in. So we do kind of differentiate between like a documented order and something that the clinician would like you to do. But it sounds like it would cover both of those scenarios.
I don't know that the provider would record a recommendation to take Tylenol as an order. Because they're not
right, because I'm saying that, and that would be an intent.
Yeah, and that could be, maybe that could be a provider that, I don't know, like if you had to represent it somehow, you could represent it as a provider goal. My goal is for you to see somebody about your smoking. I don't know.
No, we just, I guess I'm just thinking in the CDA space where we have intent, which means I want you to do this, but I'm not actually documenting an order. And request, these are the old mood code things.
Right.
And so my initial reaction on this is, well, everything in CDA that has a mood codes restricted to or available to be, sorry, not restricted to, but allows these mood codes, because that's how we identify what an order is. Then those are the things that we would put down. The downside of that is, you know, there are very few templates that can't be indicated as a, yeah, with those mood codes. There are some, but so our little mapping table would be quite huge.
Wouldn't the plan of care include all of those things?
Exactly. That's the other thing.
Right.
Everything that's in the intervention section is going to be, so that, which is almost everything in USCDI.
You saying that the plan, where you're saying is the plan of care is represented as an order?
Within the plan of care in C-CDA, and this is actually similar in fire, where they have the activity area in the fire care plan resource. But that's everything that's in there that has, in this case, wrapped in the Intervention Act is considered an order. So, I mean, I'm sure we could figure out a way to handle it in the table, but that would be the reality of what it would be in CDA.
Is there a distinction around something that is actually ordered as opposed to included in a plan?
Well, that's what I was talking about before. So how that is done in CDA is you have a mood code of intent where the thing is, you know, like just maybe a plan. But, you know, and then you could have, if you have the mood code as RQO, that's an actual order.
I would think the plan of care is made of orders.
Well, it contains orders, right?
It could contain other things too.
Sorry?
It could contain other things beside orders, but
yeah,
but it would have a bunch of orders in it most likely.
Right. So anyway, it's a big beast, which is why I think initially we were thinking, wouldn't it be? I don't know what anyone else thinks, but that was, if anyone else has any other suggestions, I mean, you know, we would go through and just have to find all of the things that represent that
Yeah.
allow request and intent I mean, if we were being thorough.
So, I would think that there's, you know, some, whether it has to be, I mean, how it's designed is really entirely up to the process about how to design it. But, you know, our intent would be, you know, to capture like most of the things that are normally ordered sort of thing. And that's, I mean, that's not official guidance, but we, you know, is there a possibility that something, you know, harder to represent in C-CDA that could be considered an order? It just, you know, how many of the things need to be, you know, is there?
It could be that we would narrow it down to, you know, any one of our templates that are planned, whatever's.
Right. Yeah. Okay, I'm gonna move to demographics, get few more picks in discussion here. So in demographics, there are 3 new potential elements, name to use. This is pretty clear inside the record target name structure. There's a given with a qualifier of CL for call me. Pronoun is a little tricky. There is a template in the gender harmony guide, and we talked about this yesterday. But we're not exactly sure. You've got to reach out to Rob McClure where the expectation of this would go. So there's a possibility. That's where we talked about that potential new demographics section. And then I'm also curious, for folks today, is anyone communicating interpreter needed today in their CDA documents? Inside language communication, there isn't an explicit, you know, there's proficiency level, which is CE, CWE, but there's not a kind of explicit interpreter needed there today.
I know I kind of fought back against this until I realized that everyone says everyone collects this as a Boolean flag, but I've never understood that. Why do you have interpreter needed? It's more of a, they don't speak English, they speak Spanish, and we don't have Spanish speaking people here. Therefore, we need an interpreter. Versus if you're on the border, you don't need an interpreter because everyone can communicate with them. So what does that flag actually mean?
Hard to agree with that. I'll be a little disappointed if this gets finalized in USCDI V5 as a Boolean flag. Like, I'm really hoping that we can get away with like using the existing structure in CDA with language communication and proficiency code to say like, oh, the patient is fluent in Spanish, but not English. And then the receiver can use that information, which is more information than they're given a Boolean flag, to decide for themselves. Does the patient need an interpreter or not at our location?
I don't think that interpreter needed can be calculated based on a language proficiency. It's because a patient could have no English proficiency, but they have a caregiver that does translation for them, or they know that their provider has. It could be situational, of course, because if you're in a clinic that has a lot of fluent Spanish-speaking providers, then you would probably say no. But if you're sending a referral to another place that you don't know, it would be, you know, this patient needs Spanish language services. If they don't, they need you know, interpreter services.
But yeah, but wasn't that what Matt was saying, Al? Like saying they need an interpreter, that calculation is totally dependent on their language capabilities. So they speak Spanish, they don't speak English, they can kind of speak Portuguese. Now you clinic decide whether you need an interpreter or not. Right?
No, Al is saying, so I'm at a, you know, clinica, whatever it is that we have around here, a lot of these clinicas, but now they're going to refer a patient to Asante Hospital, and who knows, you know, then they don't all speak Spanish there, so that when we transfer this patient, you are going to need to provide them a interpreter.
But how does Clinica know whether or not Asante is going to need to provide an interpreter? Like, I would think that the better way to do it would be for Clinica to say, here's what languages the patient does and doesn't speak, and then Asante can look at that and say, oh, well, all our providers speak Spanish, or they don't.
So
Yeah.
you're saying just send what they're proficient in, and then the receiving system,
Yeah, I think
it's on the
it's-
receiving system to determine.
I think in this case, it's like both more expressive, like it gives you strictly more information than just a Boolean flag, and also it's way easier because it's the way that CDA already works.
You're saying proficiency level is Boolean?
No,
Proficiency
interpreter
level is-
needed.
Yeah, interpreter needed is Boolean. Whereas the language communication proficiency level stuff, which is like already in CDA, is
Oh, you said
not Boolean.
USCDI is Boolean, yes. No.
Yes, USCDI is
Yeah,
Boolean, exactly.
USCDI, I mean, it is kind of I'm curious to you, Al, like an indicator whether a person needs it does read as a Boolean.
I mean, it's on a level, it is a Boolean because it's the first step. It's a first step indicating more information is needed. It's something that's different than preferred language. And it's not complete. It doesn't have all of the details about which language is required. But it's a flag that you need to pay attention to whether or not a patient might need an interpreter. Like if you were to send, like Gay's example of sending it to a referral center, where you don't show up, there's a flag that says, just requires some additional information. Like a lot of, it's not 100% complete, but it's a first step that's beyond preferred language.
Well, it's not really preferred though. If you look at the model, the little blue thing now, at least in CDA, you have, so first you're going to have a language code, and that's where you'll put, whatever language the patient is talking about. It's a little bit weird that it's only.
Yeah, you can say English, no, Spanish, high, Portuguese, a bit, right? And so those are your three languages that come across. And then from there, you have, I just guess, and like Benjamin says, it's kind of English, like interpreter needed, like an English interpreter needed or a Spanish interpreter, like it's a strange single off question. And if we can do it by saying, here's the language information that this patient has, and then you determine whether you need an interpreter or not, based on, they don't speak English, but they speak Spanish, then that to a certain extent, we're fulfilling the spirit of the requirement by saying, here's the languages and the proficiency levels that the patient has, and now you can determine if an interpreter is needed or not.
Well, and that preference indicator would tell you what they prefer, and
Yes.
then you would know by that what you need to be able to speak.
Yeah, and we've got some examples above. A person from Russia may be able to speak Russian, Armenian, Ukrainian, and prefers to speak Armenian. Right.
I'm also fuzzy on the Link and SNOMED suggestion here, like how you decided to include those.
It's just that was the Office of Minority Health is the advocate for this data element. They understand that both LOINC and SNOMED represent it slightly different ways, because the LOINC code is a do you need an interpreter, and the answer set is yes or no. And SNOMED has a stated need for interpreter code. And there's two different ways of representing it. It could be, and yes, it can be as a Boolean flag, but that identification of the need for an interpreter is a specific, it's a specific requirement for HHS services, for one. It's included in the Civil Rights Act as identification of need for interpreter as well. So it's a start. But it's not a comprehensive survey of somebody's language proficiencies.
Right. So I mean, it would be an observation if you're using the LOINC and the answer list, right? The observation is the observation code is interpreter need. It's social history observation, and the code is interpreter needed, and answer is yes, no, unable to determine.
But Al, I mean, I feel like you're not. I mean, I hear what you're saying, but I don't know if you're hearing what we're saying. And that the way the healthcare exchange standard has modeled this is to list out what the person can do, and then the health system can make a determination. The idea that we would make a determination for the patient to say they need an interpreter.
It's not
Are you going to
provided,
provide?
it's not a provider identified need. It's a patient identified need.
So this,
I think
But
that's
you'd
the
still get
crux
there.
of what's different. So a patient can be proficient in a number of languages, have a preference for English, and still identify that they have a need for an interpreter to join them.
Is the assumption when they say interpreter needed that the interpreter is translating to English? I mean, from English, yeah, to English.
To and from.
Yes.
Well, so I think that we're making it, I hear what you're saying, Brad, and even Linda, your question, right? Like I'm looking at the LOIC code and the answer set, right? Like, and it's, we're trying to interpret too much into it. The LOIC code is patient/residents need or want an interpreter to communicate with a doctor or healthcare staff. Full stop. That's the question that you ask. Do you want an interpreter? And then the answer is yes or no. So this isn't what languages can you speak. This is, I really do think it's a social history observation.
Let me just add to that. In some states, it's a legal requirement, and the state decides if the person needs an interpreter. And if the state decides you do, even if you have to fly somebody in, you have to do it.
I put the LOIC code in the chat.
I think, yeah, I mean, I
It's
still
just
don't
kind of
get
a
it.
step back, less
Yeah,
information.
I think
It is less information than what languages do you do, but it is simply answering this question. Do you need or want an interpreter? Yes or no?
Yeah, it's total lack of information then. Like,
Yeah, I'm really having a hard time coming up with like what the realistic use case for this workflow is, like when it would ever.
Because people, I've seen this. It's a question on the form. Do you need an interpreter?
So if I filled out that form and said I do need an interpreter,
Yes.
what is going to change? Like somebody shows up with an interpreter that translates English
They
to
will
and from
provide you an
Chinese,
interpreter.
and
They
I
will
speak
ask
Spanish.
you they will ask you further questions to find
In
out
what
what
language?
is needed.
Yeah.
So from what language to what? Oh, I don't speak English, I speak Spanish. Like you're right. If we communicated the language communications, you could probably infer that, but that's not what this is. This is, we need a spot to include this question.
Are you going to ask him that question in English?
So, I mean, if this
I mean, it's funny, but
is-
it's true, right?
It is true. Yes, it is English centric.
Well,
this is
but
here,
what
then
I'm
that's
saying
only
is
the
if you
requirement.
have, if you
Sorry.
have the language, then at least you know what the.
Don't you guys have an official language? Oh, wait, no, you don't.
So, I mean, this requirement to identify need for interpreter is derived from the limited English proficiency model that HHS has developed as a specific response to the Civil Rights Act, amongst other things. So yes, it's English centric. It's not exclusively English translation, interpreter to English, but it's based on the majority of the language proficiency amongst providers is English. And if you're in a clinic that the clinic takes care of Spanish speaking patients all the time, but then it's about what's needed down the road. It's like you're going to send a consult to somebody who does not have an embedded Spanish speaker or other speaker. They show up and they don't have an interpreter, and they get their appointment canceled.
But that's exactly like what I'm afraid of. By
This is the flag that says this patient needs an interpreter for their hip replacement surgery counseling.
Yeah.
Like, so then we know, at least then we know what we have to do and figure that out. Like, then we have to do something else instead of just wait for the patient to get there and say, I don't speak English.
But you
like I'm looking at the use, Matt, I'm looking at the use case description, and it says, once the need for an interpreter is captured in the EHR, often as a structured field, to checkbox, administrative staff or providers use this information to arrange for interpretation, and they may use the patients up here, what does it say? They may use the patient's preferred language in tandem with the patient's preferred language. So it is really just a checkbox. And then we'll use the language communication to figure out what kind of interpreter do we need to provide.
So going back to the example of a patient at a clinic where all the providers speak Spanish, and so the patient doesn't need an interpreter there, and they get a referral to somewhere else, does Clinic A, the one where everyone speaks Spanish, decide to set the interpreter needed flag or no? And how do they make that decision? Likewise, suppose that the patient's at Clinic B getting a hip replacement or whatever, where no one speaks Spanish. The patient doesn't need an interpreter there. They get referred back to the first clinic. Does Clinic B, where the patient doesn't need an interpreter, send a document to Clinic A being like, by the way, the patient needs an interpreter. And then the patient gets there and they don't?
But we already have preferred language as a USCDI element. And now this is the, so my preferred language is Spanish, but I don't need an interpreter because I can handle English. And so this one is my preferred language is Spanish and I can't speak English at all. So you're going to have to provide an interpreter. And I think that the clinic decides, oh, your preferred language is Spanish. Well, we have Spanish people here, so we don't have to provide an interpreter. We'll just give you a Spanish speaking doctor. And then when it gets on to the next clinic, they go, oh, we don't have any Spanish people. We're going to have to, like, it is already saying in the use case for interpreter needed, it's not but just by itself. It's a combination of that and the preferred language to see what do I need to provide.
So that's kind of what I'm thinking. Like, if it's on the clinic to decide, like, I understand the point you're trying to make, I think, which is that like if a patient doesn't understand the language at all, then that's important. The patient might need an interpreter. But the proficiency level code value set, language ability proficiency over there, like has a code, I think, for the patient can't speak this language at all. Right. So I'm still not sure what benefit the interpreter needed flag is providing. Like, it sounds maybe like it's just sort of become a legal requirement for cases other than CDA, where it's really, really easy to say, here are the languages a patient speaks and how well. Like, if we didn't already have that baked into CDA, I could see more of a use case for being like, okay, well, this is better than nothing. But in the world of CDA in particular, like if we were doing this from scratch, which we kind of are right now, I would say it is both easier to implement, like much less ambiguous and much more useful to just ditch the Boolean flag.
Right,
and...
yes. In a world where all you had was a preferred language and an interpreter needed flag. But in a world, where all you had was preferred language, then you want an interpreter needed flag. My preferred language is Spanish, doesn't tell you whether I can speak English or not.
Well, no, you can send multiple.
I'm saying in the USCDI world, where all I have is this preferred language, right? Like you're right, in CDA, we have the ability to not only say, I could speak, Russian, Ukrainian, Spanish, and I can't speak English.
Okay. Yeah.
We're getting at time.
Yeah, I know. We're okay.
This one will be an interesting one, because if you can provide more information than what the USCDI element is, and so therefore satisfy the USCDI, the spirit of the USCDI element, is that good or not?
Yeah, I mean, if ONC is going to say you need this Boolean flag,
right?
Then I think it's gonna be a little bit awkward to drop a Boolean flag in the social history section of interpreter needed, yes, and not link it somehow to the header to say where you need it, like what language you need. But I guess I don't see how this moves things forward. But
I'm gonna start marking all my forms yes. So if I end up in Montreal, that they'll at least look.
Yeah, that would be. I speak Minnesota English. Okay, so I guess the last one here is author, role, provenance, and I think with this, I'm still struggling with the roles, and exactly what we would use here. But I will hand it back to you, John.
All right, thanks.
Thank you all.
Let's. I think I will make a note, Susan, and you get into that.
Sorry. Did
I like these
Brett,
sessions.
function code, the role isn't the role the function code? Are you still, you just gave up on the role?
I mean, there are a few potentials, Lisa. You know, the personal and legal relationship set is one.
There's like care team member function,
Right.
which is like what role are you playing in terms of the services to the, and then there's the role, the role code role, which says I'm a cardiologist or I'm a, I don't know, gerontologist or whatever my licensure is.
Okay,
Right. And I
sorry,
just-
I'm gonna cut you guys off just as you just cut me
Okay.
off. I want to get to the report outs, so but Susan and Jagina, I was saying let's make a note of including this session in the next April, March, whatever IAT it is, because I think there's also a lot of value of coming and looking at the design sessions from a C-CDA perspective. All right, so now we have the report out on the breakout tracks. So, I mean, at the end of the day, all of us were eventually at the validation, but I think having a good, we'll have a report out and we can talk about some action items, but I didn't attend the advanced directive. And so Lisa and others who were at the advanced directive, do you have a report out on how that went?
Sure, I can do a couple of things. Share my screen. And I'll start with the end, which is, you know, based on eventually validating, I can definitely say that the XML samples that were prepared need some work. I'm really struggling with using the validator to figure out what's wrong with them, but I'll use the Zulip thread and post some things and see if I can get some more help on that. We did create a set of examples, like, you know, just in words, what kind of needs there were. And I think that list is right here. We had kind of like the simple case where you just need to be able to say, oh, this patient has an advanced directive document. It's a living will. You know, this is where you find it or how you reference it, maybe in their chart or externally somewhere else. Same thing, the patient can have some kind of a portable medical order that they're coming to you. They've already, some other doctor has worked with them, and those orders are coming in through a portable medical order document. And then sort of pressing on the understanding how the different organizers worked, demonstrating, well, then what happens if they've got two documents? The observations about each document is separated from each other, so you know which is which. That was to demonstrate the different uses of the organizer. Then we got to the point where in the workflow of now knowing that a patient has an advanced directive document, what if you look at it and you go, oh, they've got a healthcare agent that's been appointed. That's important information for us to know. So when I'm summarizing sort of what I've learned that's relevant and pertinent from these documents, I'm going to write down who their healthcare agent is. And so we explored how you do that. That's a certain, like an additional observation that would be added in that organizer. It's about the document. It's kind of pulling that summary information out. Then we had harder examples or more advanced ones where what you wanted to summarize is that the person actually had a preference about CPR. One way or the other, but they had some kind of an expressed preference or some kind of an expressed preference regarding intubation. And I should show one picture that we used here to describe these different kinds of documents. There's a sort of a set of patient authored kinds of documents. We call them all PACPs, patient authored care plans, but in truth is it could be as simple as just a healthcare agent appointment, could be a living will, a combination living will and healthcare agent appointment, or a mental health advance directive. These are the kinds of documents that we know of, types, I guess I should say, that use this template that's patient authored document. And then there's a variety of different kinds of portable medical order ones. And these came from other specs, work that had been done earlier. What we're focused on is how do you put an advance directive section in a C-CDA document to summarize the information that's available in these deeper other kinds of documents. And that's what we're really getting at, is this need to produce some high level summary. You don't need every detail that was very important to have in these other documents. You just need the sort of the salient, relevant, pertinent facts. And so that's what we're focused on trying to do. And these examples were the key ones. These four are our top. These are for our top picks. And then it might be interesting in an advance directive document to be able to say if they have certain kinds of preferences. So you know if that's to go reference the document and find out what the preferences are. Or talk to them about what their preferences are. Because again, this information doesn't just get, there's a really nice piece that Maria Moen does about the workflow. It doesn't just be like, oh, I got this document, I read the thing, I don't talk to anybody. You use the document to know what the person has preferences about, and there's a conversation that happens to confirm how they're feeling about things, how it's relevant to this current situation of their health. And to that end, there's clinical quality measures now, like MIPS measures, that look at whether or not someone has had, whether or not the care provider has had an advanced care planning conversation with the patient. These are encounters that actually are coded with certain service qualifiers on them so that you can know that that kind of conversation happened. And for the purpose of now evaluating some of these new, like in MIPS, it's called Advanced Care Planning measure. We were going to try to see if we could surface an observation to actually say when it was that encounter, that ACP encounter actually happened, and carry that in one of the observations. These are relevant for medical orders. Does the portable medical order have some kind of order in it for not rehospitalizing or do not resuscitate? Because if it does, and you've verified all of that, then that's when you'd want to have that observation where you actually write in the context of this encounter, the DNR status of this patient is, and then whatever you assess it to be, you the people who are doing the documentation in your EHR. And these are much more complicated. You know, we agree that this is going to, you know, take us between now and August to kind of work through all these issues. But that was that was kind of the main stuff that we did. I'm going to show a couple of the examples that we generated, even though the validator doesn't like them. The schema's not complaining, and so I can render them. There's one other slide that we went over that I thought was a little bit novel, in terms of after we thought about the examples we needed, which I'm going to have to fix this one to bury it inside of an organizer and figure out how to do that. But we talked about when people do examples, thinking about how do you structure the information that you want to represent in the example, how do you structure it in the narrative text? And using that as a design step, we kind of went over what the different possibilities were. We actually talked about people who were wishing to have tables inside tables, but that this step of actually thinking about how the information needs to be presented to the humans as being an important part of what you go through as you're figuring out how to structurally represent it is a step that we really have not done in the past. And we talked about the reasons why, maybe feeling like it's going to take away people's creativity or maybe decrease competitive advantage or something. but how important it might be to present information in a consistent way and to take the step so that, like the USP codes that you get in the grocery store, no matter what grocery store you go to, the information, the structured data that's on one of those tags is presented in exactly the same way so that consumers don't get confused, because in one store they present it one way, in another store they present it another way, another store they present it another way. The standard actually went to the level of saying, you got to put this information first, this needs to be next, you know, how the fields have to be displayed. So we talked about taking an approach where we think that part through, and we actually did some design work on making like a list for the organizer, and then tables within the list items to represent the different sort of structural parts of the observation that went in there. And I will now show what some of those samples produced in terms of what they look like. So again, you know, we're struggling with the errors, but I'm going to try, I'm going to try and show this one. So this was an example of, you know, we gutted the transfer summary so that these required sections are there with no information, or this is back to the case where I hadn't done them all as NIs yet. But the idea was to be able to show if a person had an advanced directive document, like this is a verified personal advanced care plan, link code, blah. It was verified on a certain date by Mary McDonald, who's a registered nurse. It was written by Joyce Robertson, and it was effective as of June 18th in 2021. The clinical document identifier and link to the document is actually right here. There's an endpoint source and a clinical document ID. This is like the information that you would need to know if you wanted to go query for this document on your own system or from somebody else's system. And then this is another document, so you can kind of easily see there's another one. They've also got a pulsed, was authored by by Lisa Manlove, who's an allopathic osteopathic physician in family medicine and geriatric medicine. And that was done on October 20th, 2022. Again, information that points to where you pick up that document if you needed to go look at it. And we explored actually rendering these documents in the inside of the document, like actually going and getting it and using render multimedia. Let me just show you what one of those looks like. Because we found a bug with, let's look at the pulse because it's pink. I like that. Right here. You know, the style sheet has the ability, if you allow PDF rendering, to use the render multimedia. So in this case, we're saying not only can we tell you that there's a portable medical order authored by Dr. Lisa Manlove on this date, but you can then see it. So if you wanted to confirm, you know, this was the one where I'm going to add that they have do not resuscitate, and that they don't want to be taken, you know, taken back into the hospital. I'll add those to make this, all that extra stuff would be right there, but you can actually see the document. And in the case of these very expected form types, we're feeling like it really gives doctors a lot of confidence that the information is actionable, because they can actually see the properly populated form to confirm or give them higher confidence besides the structured data that's represented. And being able to surface that readily in the document seemed like a kind of a cool thing to be able to try and do. But I got stuck when I tried to add 2 documents, because actually what you see right here, there's still an encounter section underneath this, but the style sheet doesn't let us see the rest of the document. Something about the way that this render multimedia, once you render this multimedia, it's impossible for this window to show me any more information. And there's actually a whole, like, there's an encounter section that comes after this, and then there's the remainder of displaying the details that were also in the header, and none of this is coming through. So we've got a bug somehow in the style sheet around this. And I think those, I didn't record that. I need to add that to my findings, but I think those are the kind of the tasks that we have going forward with this, is to continue to work on the needed examples, figure out what we're doing wrong with the XML against the validator. We need to fix things up so that even the single observations are always tucked inside of an organizer, and what that means semantically. I don't know, we'll have to figure that out. Style sheet problem will have to be reported, and we need to talk more about, what's the workflow for exchanging the, if you want to have the source PDF that gets scanned in or gets shared as an unstructured CDA, and you want the doctor to be able to quickly see that either by opening it in a link HTML type of way or a rendered multimedia. When you need to provide that to happen, it means you need to return more than one document. Someone queries for the transfer summary, and what you really need to do is give them back the transfer summary and this underlying source, either advanced directive or PMO or both. You're going to have to give back multiple documents, and we've really never explored more deeply how you exchange sets of documents that fulfill a requirement rather than just a single document sort of telling the whole story. So that's what we got. I don't know if anybody else has any other insights. Yep.
I posted in there the CPT code. The things that you had up there for the claims for the provider,
yep,
those all seem to relate to telehealth.
Oh, really? I don't, where I got them from, Linda, is let's see here. We did a little bit of research with Anne from HEDIS, and Yen helped me with the CMS measure. Because I was trying to look at what the measures actually required us to like expose as data. And this is percent of patients age 65 years and older who have an advanced care plan or surrogate decision maker. So that's your healthcare agent. This is your actual document. Documented in the medical record or documentation in the medical record that an advanced care plan was discussed, but the patient did not wish or was not able to name a surrogate decision maker. That's an example I should have, is that I don't have one, and I have a reason why. That was sort of driving the examples that we made. Then they had some notes. This measure is to be submitted a minimum of once per performance period for patients seen during the performance period. There is no diagnosis associated with this measure. The measure may be submitted by merit-based incentive payment systems, eligible clinicians who perform the quality actions described in the measure based on the services provided and the measure-specific denominator coding.
That thing you have highlighted, though, is just a note that they could include the telehealth.
Oh, okay.
Down below, for the denominator, it has all those codes, and then the numerator says if it's documented, but there may be more on the next page that shows the additional CPT code. I don't know. Yeah, there's a G code there. Yeah, see, it says Advanced Care Planning, CPT 2. I don't know. I'd look for that code though. Oh, there it is, 99497. See, service typically provided under CPT code go above the or 2 paragraphs.
Here?
And then, yeah, see how it says under 99497 and 99498 satisfy the advanced care planning?
Yep. So those are the CPT codes that we should really be looking for, and not this other stuff. I didn't really understand what it meant anyway, so let's fix that. And this
there may be some other,
just that I can just delete that.
I think so. It basically is saying it can be done via telehealth. It doesn't have to be in person, but there's many other conditions in that thing too. So I don't know. You might just say, you might just have the other links, because there's things like that are included and excluded, you know, in the measure that are not. I didn't get a chance to read all the way through there.
It seems to me like one of the things that we don't usually do when we do examples is we don't think about what the quality measure implications are and try to figure out. I know we're doing so much already, and we're trying to figure out how to CDA map to fire, and it's all so much to think about. But it seems to me like one of the major uses of all this structured data is gaining insight from it, which the quality measure work is what helps us gain insight from what's going on with all this care. And so it seems like the use case of quality address associated quality measures should be considered when we're figuring out how we represent the data, what good examples we need to make. It just feels like it needs to be in our focus. I think that's the main point I'm trying to make here.
Yeah, and I'm curious. I don't know what EMRs would do, but like if they have, you know, those codes up, there were other codes in there that basically said this can happen during any of these codes, which is kind of like office visits or annual exams or whatever. And I wonder if the encounter is in the EMR, if it comes in as a annual exam, are the additional encounter codes even posted in there? Because most of the time you wouldn't set an appointment just for this. It would just be like you had an appointment and they gave you a shot. So there's another another billing code there. Anyway, happy to talk to you more about it, but that when I saw that, it worried me.
So Linda, I'm just going to note your name here to say, you know, lots of good thoughts and questions, because that's what I'm trying to get at about really understanding these additional workflow considerations that just make sure that what we're designing is like feasible and doable and achieves the right objectives. I'll say thoughts and questions, and we'll circle back on that.
Sounds good.
Thank you.
All right, Benjamin, do you want to give us a report back on the validation track?
No, but yeah, so we got several people running the validator locally. We all learned, myself included, that how to get the actual validation website running locally, which, depending on your internet speeds and proclivities, may be better or more useful. But beyond that, we went and started validating some. We took the C-CD from the companion guide and pulled it in and started validating it, and found a few issues with it that needed to be fixed. Found a few issues that we needed to fix in our either in CDA core or in C-CDA, and then we found several things where the validator was just not working right, and so we were taking those away. Let me see. Oh, I'm not sharing. Of course not. I don't know that I have much to share, but I wrote up some of the issues that we're going to take back to Graham and the other fire folks. Just some errors that we were seeing with validation, and we at the bottom of there we've got some takeaways that we should be fixing. I've done the top one. I've told Jean to talk about what this element does not match any known slice defined in the profile means. And the other thing is
you're not displaying.
I know.
Do you want to
just sent the link? I figured you all could look at the link,
okay,
but
sure.
I'm
Never
just
mind.
That's fine. I'll share. Yeah, so well, the multiple ID elements causing the validator to crash, that's obviously something that we need to fix, or the validation tool needs to fix. This one, I think I actually know what's going on, but it's still a validator issue that needs to be solved. This is one we've already raised with Graham, and he's pointing to terminology, and so we need to talk to these terminology people. But I also still kind of want to push back on Graham and say, just because someone in terminology puts an OID on a code system shouldn't mean that you completely not crash validation, but consider all C-CDA an error. I think we just have a question about what this binding has no source, so can't double quote T B check, because some code elements just don't have bindings, and maybe this is just a normal fire thing, but that's something that happens a lot in CDA, so be nice if we could hide those. And finally, the validation by template ID was working some of the time, but it wasn't working to find entries or sub entries. So I'm going to take that one offline a little bit, but otherwise raise that up to Graham. But as far as the takeaways, we've got the intended recipient class code should be optional. We have already fixed that. If we go to current, intended recipient.
Intended, not information.
Intended, thank you. Class code is now optional, and whenever this one builds, this is my local version, I did add the value set too. So CDA information recipient role, which just has assigned and health chart. So that one's done. This is the one I just mentioned that I voluntold Jean about. I think that's going to be kind of a common thing, and I don't know if there's a great way to describe it, other than dig into it and see what sort of errors it has, because most of the time, especially when it's this profile type of slicing, like in this case, the problem section, the entry, it can't figure it out, even though what I say all you need to know is the template ID, it says it needs to be valid for everything. And so if there's any error down at some very deep section entry relationship, observation, template ID, or something even deeper, all of these are causing it to not be a conformant problem concern act. Ergo, it says, oh, well, that's not a problem concern act. You should probably know about that. Well, it should be finding that, but the other problem is, obviously we're not getting that little like blue line that says validating section entry 1 against Problem Concern Act. So yeah, that is that's this thing that we will be raising. We had a small change that will move the social history still says should contain smoking status meaningful use. That is a deprecated template that has been replaced with smoking status. So we will make that change. Now that we've got the minimum C-CD header example valid, I think that's this guy here. Yeah, with all the empty sections. This is valid without errors, except for these errors that we can't do anything about. We will put that in the C-CDA IG. And oh, yeah, this was on me, I think. That I will fix this shall Problem Concern Act, and it just has to do with how the invariant was written. So that is also a fix that, if I go back to C-CDA, we go to like problem section. Yeah, it has to do with this fact that we're using an or here, so now it wants a Boolean, and this is just giving us the entry, so we just needed to add a dot exists on there. Again, that's something I've done. We're just sort of waiting for it to build around here. That takes a little bit longer than C-CDA. And that's what I've got. Oh, and we also talked about that I'm going to be working on a tool to produce schematron from the Fire IG, and originally targeting C-CDA, but it should work on any structure definition that is based on CDA. And that I should have more information on that coming out in the coming weeks, and I hope to have a beta of the source code available on HL7 GitHub by early May sometime. And the idea is to have a draft of C-CDA schematron ready by working group meeting for people to poke at. But certainly if people are interested, I'm happy to answer questions or shoot me emails offline if you have desires or requests for improvement. I know Matt has already talked about, one of the things is, since we don't have conformance numbers in all places, some of these do if they were based on those primitive constraints, but otherwise there was just nothing. We just know that, somewhere here procedure is 1-to-1. So we can add some string onto the end of this that says, template, whatever this is, procedure activity. Actually, that might be something I have to look into. Oh, actually, yeah, procedure activity. There is no procedure activity observation anymore. So yeah, this is an old version of the C-CD, so these should not exist. The only thing you can have is procedures in here. That said, yeah, that's about it for validation. There was only a few tiers shed, I think, with people trying to get the validators up and running themselves, but and I think Brett never did. He was getting some errors trying to, I think he was trying to get the Gradle, the live web version running, but that's my report out for validation. I don't have much more than what we already talked about. I will keep talking until Jean interrupts me.
Does anyone have any questions?
I'll ask a question. So for Benjamin, so if people are interested in this schematron work that you're doing, should they just drop you an email and get in touch?
Yeah, I think I will announce this a bit more with some resources on our next Thursday's HL7 call once I have a bit more details. But You're welcome to reach out to me on email or Zulip, or Skype. If you know my Skype, I have Skype for like 3 HL7 people. But yeah,
Is that intended to be derogatory?
I mean, when I tell people I use Skype, well, I talk to a few HL7 people on Skype. I could talk to you all on Zoom. Oh, there's Zulip, by the way. Which actually reminds me, Jean brought this up for anyone who didn't hear. We do have a C-CDA stream in Zulip. So if you have further questions on C-CDA or validation issues, this is a good place to come, and hopefully it will be more active than it has been so far. Yeah.
Okay, any other questions? Nope. All right. Well, we can move on then to wrap up. So in terms of August IAT, we do have a page up on Confluence. So if there are things you would like to, obviously you might have some right now, but if there are other, as things come along and there's issues or topics that you want to present at an upcoming IAT, we do have a page for that. I am just bringing the page up and I'll show you. Share my screen. So in this Implementation-A-Thon space in the Confluence, we have upcoming IATs, 2024-08, and there's a topic suggestion. So you can raise the topic suggestions. I'll put that in the chat. As you can see, it's still a little bit of a blank slate, but we'll Susan and the team will be adding to. We do have some other agenda items that will go on. Ask the UNC and some of the other repeating ones. I want to bring up. I think I talked about this with the team yesterday. So normally we do it in April. We do it around sometime in April, and we look for when other conferences are going on so that we don't miss, that we don't overlap with the conference. One of the things that was brought up is the fact that now that we have a yearly C-CDA publishing schedule, it will be April when the QA is going on and the approvals need to happen. So we might want to move this IAT either earlier or later, and I think earlier might be better, so that we're not interrupting the flow, the HL7 process flow of getting C-CDA out the door. So I'd like people to think about that. We don't need an answer now, but in your survey, let us know, earlier is a March or an early April IAT versus say a May IAT, which would be better. Speaking of the survey, Kirsten did send out the survey. I know I got an email, so everyone should have gotten an email. Please, fill out the survey, give us your input. We, I'm sure people tell you this all the time, but we look at the survey results and we look to see how did this session work. And over the last 3 or 4 years of IATs, I know Jaginder and I have really said, okay, we know what we need. We need sessions that have, that come to conclusions, and we need conclusions and blah, 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 and things like that. And all of those comes from what people fill out in the survey. So please do fill out the survey. And again, if you're attending the May working group meeting in Dallas, make sure you grab your IAT fan, and we'll look to get a group photo of all the IAT attendees who will be there in Dallas. And I recognize that not everyone's going to be there. Plan for the August, I talked about that. All right, Jaginder, do we have any outstanding action items or outstanding things that we need to get some people assigned to? I think we were good on everything we had.
I think we are good for everything. I would encourage people to look at the event notes once we have them published, and let us know if there's anything that we've either missed or misrepresented, as always.
Okay. And for those who know, again, same thing in the implementations page. There's Implementation-A-Thon's page. There's the agenda, and then there's the event page where Jaginder's been taking notes and putting in people's slides and things like that. So please take a look at that once we get that completed. Does anyone have any comments or any questions?
John, this is Jim Grove.
Yep.
Just a question about the discussion that we had with, C-CDAs for specialty data.
Yes.
Being able to have some sort of guidance for those, those organizations that are doing sort of the add-on type of stuff. So we didn't really come up with an answer for that, of how they either using something existing and reducing the requirements or approving a new C-CDA.
Yeah, and it's interesting. We did have a separate one of the action items was about the dental C-CDA that Russ Ott had produced, and he had a similar question around guides where you're not really creating a entirely new document type, but you're just creating profiles, or if you want, or templates on top of templates that can be used. So I think there will be some ongoing discussion at the CD management group and structured docs around those, because that's really where like our iCare IG fits in. We didn't create a new iCare document, but we created some templates on, that reuse result organizer and result observation and physical exam section, right? So how will those?
Right. But the issue is these supplemental programs don't have access to meet the requirements of creating a C-CDA. They only have the specialty data, so they can't create a valid C-CDA. And the host DHR doesn't have access to the specialty data because
Well,
they don't.
you can create a valid CCD. You just would say no information for the required sections, right?
So that's acceptable to do that even on the required sections. It would be, everything would be filled out as, no information, and that would be acceptable.
Yeah.
That's a workaround we can use if that's the answer that we go back to them with.
I mean, the sample CCD, that we were creating in the validation track had that. We started with just the mandatory sections and put in NI, or say we don't have any information. So there you go. There's a valid CCD that has no information, and then we could add in a physical exam section into that.
Okay, if that's acceptable, that's an answer that we can go with. That's fine. Okay, thanks.
Right. So that's in terms of creating, you're right, in terms of creating the C-CDA document, that's done. But what we do want to figure out is these kinds of IGs where it's, it's not necessarily creating new templates from scratch, but just, for specific purposes, creating some constraints on existing templates. How do those, what are those? And again, those are easier to create now. We've shown with our specialty iCare IG. So
yeah, I think that Lisa made that comment that, that as we expand and we're covering all the data everywhere, I don't think we need specific specialty IGs. I think we show somebody how to use a section, and you should be able to use it for any topic.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
In that way, Jean, do you think that the documents are they informative rather than like an STU, whatever, not informative?
I think you could still STU, right? Like if you look at our iCare, I mean, obviously our iCare is not even validated, just us.
Yeah.
But eventually you'd want to get, I think you'd want to ballot it because you'd want people's eyes on it. You'd want, in our case, you'd want the iCare professionals to take a look and say, yes, I agree with using those codes. And I agree with those are the sets of tests that we want to represent, and so on and so forth. And I suspect with Russ, the same kind of thing. When he was talking about the dental and snow dent and things like that, that he'd want to make sure that, well, they did ballot theirs, right? I think.
Yeah.
So, yeah. So I think you would, but it's no, it's what is, I think a lot of us have done, I'm not sure, but it seems to me that supplemental guides have been created because we didn't have the ability to bring those templates back into C-CDA as easily as we could have. And so now I think you have a path for where it's entirely new data and entirely new templates. But in the case of, hey, here's how I use the physical exam section in the results organizer to represent my data. I hear what you're saying. It's almost informative, but you'd probably want it as an STU so that you get eyes on it to say this is, you know, an informative way. It's an implementation guide of an implementation guide. Here's how I implement C-CDA.
In the GOM, did we make up a rule that says if you're a guide that's off from another guide, like, you know, your name is CDA, Consolidated CDA, Eye Care Specialty, something like, is there a lineage rule to name things that are children under an IG that might already be under a standard?
Well, so, I mean, yeah, this is kind of a bit far away, but yeah, you wouldn't refer to the CDA, so you would say this is a C-CDA IG, Eye Care IG.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking, rather than making some sort of special category, like we're like, oh, the nutrition guide, the ODH, the advanced directive, and the pregnancy were supplements to C-CDA, but nothing else is. It seems like instead what we should do is apply the naming rules, and then you'd say, well, all these guides that have the far left part of their name is Consolidated CDA, they're the guides that just use and further refine Consolidated CDA templates.
Right.
Yes. Yeah, for example, podiatry, the Podiatry Association wrote a letter supporting what we were doing, but couldn't come up with any people to participate. So, you know, we shouldn't need to have to write a podiatry guide. It seems like the eye care guide is used, the eye care data and the podiatry data, you know, they can use the same examples for how to use the guide. I don't think it matters what you're putting in there if you're learning how to use the guide, use the templates.
Right.
I guess the only thing that like we ran into when we did the advanced directive supplement, it was because there was no way to work inside C-CDA to advance those templates. But we ended up creating a couple of new templates. So that's the only problem, is like if dental
Yeah, I
or
think
eye
that's
care.
where the CD management group needs to get into from a management side, is, you know, differentiating between a guide that is creating new templates versus a guide that's just explaining how to use existing templates to show your data.
Versus one that does both.
Versus one that does both. Yeah, well, I have a guide that, you know, I've got a number of templates and these are net new, or these templates are just, you know, taking result organizer and fixing some codes, right? Yeah.
Yeah. Well, okay. So did you write? Well, I think you should write that down as an action item that the management
CD
group needs
management
to
group
do.
to determine how to handle guides where you're not creating new templates. Sure, we'll write that down.
Or a hybrid where you're mostly using existing templates, but you create a couple new ones. So
Sure.
I think the rule needs to be able to address that, because I think most of them will be in that bucket.
Great. Does anyone else have any comments or closing discussion? Well, again, I think a successful IAT. I want to thank all of you for coming, all of you for participating. Jaginder and I look forward to, and now Susan, we look forward to doing these. These are fantastic places to meet all of you and see, you know, some of you who have been coming to all 20. It's been great. I hope to see you in Dallas if you're there. I hope to see you again in August to that virtual IAT. And with that, we'll close this IAT. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Rochelle says see y'all at WGM.
Yep.
Betcha.
Thanks.